There's no intro for this video. This video, I'm talking about one of the problems with Pokemon Champion's current metagame. Now, I know what a lot of you guys are thinking, right? Moxie boosted. Are you going to scrub quotes today? Are you going to say a Pokemon's like broken and that you hate it and that the video game's bad because of it? No, actually, no. I'm more of a when a Pokemon or like when a game is unbalanced to me, I see it more from the perspective of like it is what it is, and I'm gonna do my best to succeed regardless of like how balanced the game is. I will play it in a way that makes me feel good, right? I like that approach to it. But with Pokemon Champions, I can actually like discuss this in a way that I think you guys will find pretty interesting. So let me explain this. Pokemon Champions is kind of an unbalanced game. Not in the way that like there are Pokemon that are broken, that dominate the game, like they're stupidly broken. Basket Legion might be that. But the main issue with the game, I would say, is with the current lack of options for specific roles. Now here's the thing, right? If you look at the broader Pokedex in Pokemon Champions, there are a lot of Pokemon in the game. But the issue is that within certain roles, there are a few Pokemon that do a role better than the Pokemon that does that role the best. I'll explain it like this, right? If you want to use a fairy type in this game, you basically have four options, and that's Sylveon, which is #1 in format as far as fairy types go right now. Mega Floette, which is considered like the #2 as far as the offensive fairies goes. We have Whimsicott, which is hardly considered a fairy type. It is functionally a grass type, or not grass type. It is like functionally a fairy type, right? But it doesn't really like have offensive potential unless it's running the Fairy Feather set, which is picking up right now. And you have like Primarina. Now, Primarina is a fairy type. It's a dual type. It's mostly like a water type, but the fairy type is very good with it. As for the other fairy types in the game, right? If I could spell. As for the other fairy types within the game, there are other fairy types that you could be using. But the issue is that they don't do what you need them to, like these four. For example, Mega Meganium is a good fairy type, but it is a much higher cost fairy. Where Mega Floette is a high cost fairy in that it is a mega. It is a high cost fairy that is worth the cost. It is a stupidly high damaging Pokemon. Mega Meganium has high damage, but like 143 as compared to, what is this thing? 155 with Fairy Aura. That's like a whole different deal, right? The other fairies, Clefable is not considered an offensive fairy. It's like hardly ran on a lot of teams, but it is a good redirection user. And like Hatterene, it really only gets seen on like Trick Room teams with like Indeedee, and now that Indeedee is not in the game, like it doesn't really see any play. And like the other fairies, it's like Scarf Gardevoir, Mega Gardevoir, they're kind of whatever. As far as like the game's concerned, these are like the only fairies that you see, right? That's fine. This, I would say, in the grand scope of Pokemon Champions, is a good spread of viable Pokemon that do pretty similar things. Whimsicott kind of being excluded from this list because it's like not able to click Dazzling Gleam. It is the spread damager, right? However, with steel types specifically, and a bunch of other types, it is pretty hard to find a Pokemon that does the role as good as the best Pokemon that does this role, and that is King Gambit. King Gambit is a Pokemon who is not only a good offensive steel type as it runs Iron Head to deal with opposing fairies, but also it has access to like Sucker Punch and has access to Kowtow Cleave, right? It is a good offensive physical steel type. Let's look at other physical steel types within this game. Steel, physical. Or not physical, why am I typing physical? We'll steel and we'll sort by attack. Our options are Mega Excadrill, which sees no use because base Excadrill is usually better. However, base Excadrill only works on sand teams. It works on other teams, but it's mostly known for its sand roll. We have Mega Scizor, who is picking up admittedly, but it has a much higher cost than King Gambit. On most teams, because you have a different Mega Pokemon, you will be running the King Gambit. And then the other notable steel types that have a good physical attack stat, there's base Scizor, not quite as good as King Gambit because it isn't checking Basket Legion the way King Gambit does. And that's basically it. Mega Lucario, once again, a high cost mega. Mega Aggron, a high cost mega. Skarmory, a high cost mega. And like these guys don't have as like a big of a reward for them. And then the other steel types aren't really offensive steel types. Archaludon is a special attacker, which is a completely different role than the King Gambit. In fact, Archaludon is arguably an electric type if you really want to get weird with our description of it. Orthworm is a support weird Pokemon that kind of is in its own category. Fortress is a defensive monster, and Corviknight is a defensive monster. As far as the offensive steel types go, King Gambit is the only one in its role that does what it does, checks the things that it checks, and is able to not be a like high cost option. The one that frustrates me the most about this game, and I'm not saying this like I'm super upset about it, but it is a frustrating thing when team building, is the fire types actually. Because in the grand scheme of things, the fire types are actually among some of the better represented in this game. There is a lot of fire types in this game. But the spoiler here is there's only like 3 good ones. And those 3 good ones all basically play differently, right? Now the GOAT is of course Charizard. We're talking about Charizard today. Charizard is on a lot of teams. Charizard, Aerodactyl, Charizard, Mega Floette, these dual mega teams are dominating the competitive scene right now. And that is for good reason. Charizard is a Pokemon who does what it does, and there's like one other Pokemon that can do what Charizard does, right? Let me explain how Charizard plays. Charizard likes to lead off games in a lot of situations, either with a Venusaur or an Aerodactyl or a Garchomp or something. And the way that a lot of these teams function is you use a Pokemon like Charizard who has this high special attack stat and immediately sets Sun, who has this good speed tier, great damage output, spread damage, and is able to chunk everything down into the range of the Pokemon that you have in the back. This is a good example team. We have Charizard, we have a Tailwind setter, and we have Pokemon like Garchomp, Basculegion, and King Gambit, which can widely be considered win conditions. If you manage to get everything in range of a Basculegion Aqua Jet, or a Scarf Basculegion Wave Crash, or a Last Respects, or a King Gambit Sucker Punch, it's very hard to lose a game. This is why we have like Glamora picking up right now, because it makes the poison, it causes the opposing team to have to take poison damage for the rest of the game with its toxic spikes, getting them in range of the King Gambit, right? Before we had that, we had the Charizard approach and the Aerodactyl and Garchomp approach, where you chunk everything in range. Charizard is the GOAT of spread damage in this game right now, because it is, yes, a high cost mega Pokemon, but it does have access to Heat Wave, Weather Ball, Solar Beam, and you just run protecting your final slot. And you literally just lead off that game with your Aerodactyl, with your Tailwind setter. You Heat Wave the opposing team, get them in range, spread that damage, and while your Charizard may go down early in the game because it isn't the easiest Pokemon to maintain, it will still do what it needs to do game to game and be a workhorse on the team, getting things in range of the Pokemon in the back. I want you to name one other fire type that can do that. And the spoiler is, there's like one, and it's Mega Delphox. Now here's the thing. Mega Delphox has the exact same special attack stat, but it has higher speed at the cost of not setting Sun. That being said, Mega Delphox still has great damage output, and it can have a Sun setter next to it. It can play similar to how Charizard does. However, it does require extra help to get there, with higher reward if you can play it right. It also has better tools, better offensive coverage, because it has like psychic moves, it has grass moves, it has all this going on, right? But beyond these 2 Pokemon, finding another alternative to Charizard or Mega Delphox is pretty difficult. It's hard to mix and match pieces when there's one piece that does what it does in the game. Regardless of how you build your bike, you need the front wheel, you know? You need the wheel on the bike. You're not gonna be able to do wheelies and win a race. You need the front wheel, and Charizard is that front wheel for a lot of teams. Let's look at other fire types in the game. I have a whole box of fire types, and I have the explanation as to why they're not able to do what Charizard does, or at least not function the same way. Okay, so I already explained Mega Delphox, right? But here are basically every other relevant fire type that you see in the game, with like, there's some Pokemon I'm leaving out of here, but like the fact of the matter is, you won't be seeing people use Mega Houndoom, base Houndoom, Infernape, base Ninetales, Salazzle. You don't really see these Pokemon seeing use because they don't hit that same threshold of damage or like that same utility that a Charizard does, right? Other Pokemon in the game do exist that are fire types. However, they play completely differently. Incineroar is an incomparable role. Incineroar is a Pokemon who clicks Fake Out, Knock Off, Parting Shot. It is a support Pokemon who occasionally will click a Flare Blitz with like a Charcoal or something to deal massive damage. That being said, Incineroar is not comparable to the two Pokemon in the front. Mega Charizard X does exist in the game, but it is a physical attacker. It doesn't play like the same way, right? It doesn't play like a Charizard X does. It's not a spread special attacker, but it does kind of do what it does in that it is a very powerful lead fire type Pokemon, but it does require a whole team to support it. There is like one Mega Charizard X team, and it is a Sinistcha, Garchomp, Milotic, like a whole shebang. There's a different team around the Charizard than there would be a Charizard Y. Difficult to compare the two for that reason, and also it's not as easy to slot in that spot. This thing isn't even really like it isn't even really like an offensive Mega Pokemon. This is a support Mega Pokemon, Mega Scovillain. It does have access to, you know, a good special attack stat with a good fire type stab move in Overheat and also Flamethrower, but it actually doesn't have access to Heat Wave. To be honest, if it had Heat Wave, you could almost make a case for maybe Mega Scovillain being able to play a little bit more of an offensive role like Charizard. But for good reason, it doesn't have Heat Wave. Only single target. Talonflame does run Flare Blitz, doesn't really run Heat Wave, doesn't really run Overheat. It is a whole different deal. This is a Tailwind support Pokemon. Torkoal is only on Trick Room. Torkoal is, as of right now, beyond the two Pokemon in the front, like the Charizard and the Delphox, the only Pokemon who does a comparable thing, but it only functions on a Trick Room team. Yes, Torkoal has high damage, Sun Setting, and Eruption and Heat Wave, right? It is able to hit really, really hard, but it only works on a Trick Room team. Now, Hisuian Typhlosion, once again, a Pokemon that is similar to Charizard. Very similar to Charizard in its role. It is a lead Pokemon, it chunks things down. It is a powerful Eruption user that still has access to Heat Wave and also does like the Choice Scarf. That being said, its damage actually isn't super impressive when you get down to it. Hisuian Typhlosion was good in previous formats because it would either have a Sunsetter next to it, which it does have that in this format with Whimsicott with Sunny Day, right? But it relied heavily on Terra or like a Choice Specs. It needs that boost in damage to get full value. And beyond that, this thing falls victim to three of the biggest threats in the format. It does not like Basket Legion. It does not like Kingambit. It just loses to Kingambit. Matter of fact, if it runs the Choice Scarf, you can't avoid the Sucker Punch. And it loses to Charizard. It can't hit Charizard very hard. Camerupt, once again, similar, spread fire attacker, but it requires a whole team around it to do what it wants to do. It cannot be slotted instead of a Charizard. It is a different team. We have Hisuian Arcanine. Physical attacker. Does not do that Heat Wave stuff. It can do that Heat Wave stuff. It can, but it doesn't hit nearly as hard. And this one's the one that hurts the most. Volcarona. 135 special attack, 100 speed. So far, the closest thing we have to the Charizard, but it is a Rock Slide victim. This format is filled with Rock Slide. And beyond that, even if it were not a Rock Slide victim, it doesn't do what Charizard does as effectively because it has 135 special attack that is lower than Mega Charizard Y's and also doesn't set Sun. In position, Volcarona is able to do what Charizard does, but that requires 1 to 2 Quiver Dances, which means that where Charizard does get the immediate value, that Tailwind Heat Wave potential, that Overheat Tailwind, the Weather Ball Tailwind, like that just immediate damage, Volcarona can't do that. It needs to set up before it can really hurt things with Heat Wave and Giga Drain and like Bug Buzz. It needs turns to set up. And finally, Mega Chandelure. Mega Chandelure is a Pokemon with access to the highest special attack among like basically all the Pokemon we've talked about so far. It is a Ghost type. It is immune to Fake Out. Can it do that Tailwind Heat Wave stuff that Charizard can do? Yes. But once again, it's just not fast enough. 90 base speed, you're getting outsped by a lot of Pokemon, even bulky, low speed Garchomps. Charizard can outrun a lot of Garchomps because they don't run max speed now. They run like Adamant and like a bulky spread. Chandelure will get outsped by even the bulky Garchomps. And beyond that, still does not like Rock Slide, still not hitting quite as hard immediately because the sun isn't up. Chandelure is the most questionable of these, but it just doesn't do what Charizard can do. Now, Charizard is still a Rock Slide victim. Obviously, it is the biggest Rock Slide victim that is relevant in the format right now. But the fact of the matter is we're not running Rock Slide because Rock Slide is stupidly broken. It is, don't get me wrong. But we see this much Rock Slide because there's this much Charizard. And Charizard succeeds in spite of the Rock Slide. There really isn't an alternative to Charizard for a team, and that's why Charizard is so overrepresented for its role. Look at these teams. It is lead off Charizard, chunk things in range of the Gambit. Lead off Charizard, chunk things in range of everything in the back. Lead off Charizard, chunk things in range in the back. A lot of these teams function the same. That's why Gambit's so good. That's why Charizard and Gambit get paired so much. That's why Basculegion and Charizard get paired so much. This exists with other things. This exists with like other Pokemon in the format where they just don't really have alternatives. I talked about it with King Gambit. Like the fairy types, it's its own thing. Like fairy types, I think there is a good spread. But the water types, Basculegion, there's not much competition for Basculegion because as far as I'm concerned, Basculegion has 2 Pokemon competing for its spot. And it's Palafin, aka Basculegion after a turn, and then there's Mega Starmie, which is, in my opinion, expensive Basculegion that doesn't have Fake Out immunity. The fact of the matter is, beyond the rock, paper, scissors way that like the top Pokemon in this format play, you know, with the Sneasler, Basculegion, King Gambit circle, where Sneasler beats King Gambit beats Basculegion, and Basculegion beats Sneasler. Beyond that, like interaction, like the other thing that's holding the format back is just that like certain Pokemon don't have alternatives. It really is that simple. You're not going to catch me running a Specs Ninetales instead of a Charizard because, or a Scarf Ninetales instead of a Charizard because there's no Specs, because Ninetales isn't doing the job as good as Charizard. And if I want to run a different fire type, like the other ones on this list, it requires a whole different team. It's not as just plug and play as a Charizard can be. So yeah, that's just something I wanted to yap about really quick for today's video. This is going to be a much shorter video, much less organized, but I just wanted to talk about that. The phenomena in this format that I would argue is the biggest issue. Now, obviously, this will be remedied come the end of June or the mid-June. I think June 11th or June 15th or something is when we get the next update to the game, which is when we should be getting more Pokemon. But how many more Pokemon? And what Pokemon can fix this? Because there are Pokemon that can do what Charizard can do, but they require certain things. They require items like a choice specs. They require like, you know, different things to get them to be the Charizard of their teams. I would say that a Pokemon that could do this is, of course, Chi-Yu. I don't expect Chi-Yu to come back anytime soon, but, you know, there's other Pokemon that could try this. I would say Heatran is something that we desperately need in this game. Heatran is a Pokemon that not only is able to deal with Floette and, like, King Gambit and stuff, but it's an answer to Charizard that also is able to be a less expensive Charizard, leading to Charizard not being on every single team because you have a Heatran that does what it does. Heatran, while not as fast as Charizard, is historically able to function pretty similarly. You know, it's interesting. It's really interesting that, like, you know, it's hard to find alternatives to this Pokemon. Like, because we have been used to, like, playing in a game with a ton of Pokemon in it. This is the most cut down decks we've had in a very long time. But we don't have like a Blacephalon. We don't have like an Iron Moth, a Chi-Yu. We don't have like these higher damage fire types, which means that like in a low power format like the one we're playing in, the gap between like the mid tiers and the high tiers is like a canyon. It's hard to find something that does what you need them to do. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to talk about today. If you guys enjoyed, you know, leave a like, comment down below what you think about this. And let me know, like, I still enjoy this format. I still very much enjoy playing Regulation MA, but I want to know your guys' thoughts. I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.